Hello, everybody, and welcome back to episode 3 of the Speak Now podcast. We are your hosts, Jonathan Wolfarth, Eli Malone, and Steve Malone. Eli, aka Punchki Boy, me, aka JWolf, Steve, aka Polish Falcons. Welcome back. It's been a couple years, and I feel like that's kind of been the trend with this podcast is we release an episode once like every 2 or 3 years. But we're looking to be a little bit more consistent in that. So yeah, here we are. It is 2023. We are out of COVID, but we are still using Zoom for this. We're loving it. And we're going to go into free agency winners and losers. And then after that, we will talk about Lamar Jackson, Aaron Rodgers, and then we'll go into alternating mock draft. So starting us off with free agency winners, Eli, who do you have as a free agency winner this year?
Well, I don't mean to be biased. However, it just so happens that my favorite team quite possibly had the best offseason in the NFL. I won't say the best because obviously there's opinions and such. I thought teams like the Eagles had a really good offseason. They retained all their veterans basically, except Javon Hargrave, which is a big loss. But the Detroit Lions, a big thing for me that is not extremely common, and it's seeing the Detroit Lions take the turn, is the pay cuts that their players took. You saw Vitae take a pay cut, and you saw Romeo Cora take like a $9 million pay cut. So that's gigantic for a franchise that's turning the corner with their new regime. They're and coming into their third year. And then I thought the best signing that's happened this offseason was Chauncey Gardner-Johnson coming in for only $6 million or $6.5 million guaranteed. I thought that was a steal of free agency. I thought he was arguably the best safety in the free agency window. And I feel like David Montgomery and Cam Sutton were both real home run signings, and also still the Brad Holmes signings. He doesn't shy away from sticking to his guns. He doesn't go and sign the big names. He signs guys that fits the Detroit culture. And I think it's a real culture shift for the Detroit Lions.
Yeah, I contemplated putting them as one of my winners. They definitely, I think, got better, and I think this offseason is an indication of the culture that they are building. Steve, how about you? Who's your first winner?
This might be a little bit of a surprise, but I listed the Houston Texans as one of my winners. Hear me out on this. I figured my son there would pick the Lions, being a homer just like myself. But I feel like with D'Amico Ryans coming in as the coach, I feel like they kind of set themselves up to open their roster and kind of make it their own. They did fill up their backfield. They added Devin Singletary and Mike Boone to go with Dameon Pierce. They also got a veteran quarterback in Case Keenum to mentor whoever they draft in the upcoming draft, assuming a quarterback they'll take at some point during the draft. They also bolstered their offensive line with Laramie Tunsil, who's one of the best tackles out there, along with Shaq Mason, getting him from the Bucs. Along with that, they picked up some extra draft capital with the Brandon Cooks trade. So they kind of opened up kind of some new spots on the roster for wide receivers. And they also filled in some spots as far as Denzel Perryman, Corey Littleton, and Jimmy Ward on their defense. So I feel like with 5 picks in the top 73 that they'll be able to get a lot of new starters and kind of fill out their roster and kind of start new with a new coaching staff and whatnot. So I looked at the Houston Texans as definitely starting to actually build a team versus just kind of running in circles like they have the past 2 to 3 seasons.
I do like that pick. I should have really thought about them. I do think, I will say, the one questionable decision I thought they made this offseason was signing Robert Woods for $9.5 million a year. And I feel like they signed Noah Brown for only $2.5 million this year. And I'd argue Noah Brown could arguably be a bigger contributor. Like we saw him on Dallas. When Michael Gallup was on IR at the start of the year, really contribute. So I think that was a questionable signing. But I think the Texans was a solid pick. Other than that, especially with the amount of draft capital you mentioned. Jonathan, what's your winner you have here today?
Yeah, that's interesting pick, Steve. Not gonna lie there. So my first winner of the offseason so far is the Miami Dolphins. I think they added David Long at linebacker. They added Jalen Ramsey at corner. That's going to improve their pass defense for sure, which ranked 27th in pass yards allowed last year. They were 26th in passing touchdowns allowed and 29th in interceptions. So that pass defense needs to get better if they're going to continue to try to contend, especially in the AFC East, where they're going to go against Josh Allen twice a year, potentially Aaron Rodgers twice a year. Even expect Mac Jones to do a little bit better this next year. So you really got to improve your pass defense just to contend in that division and contend in the AFC where you have like Patrick Mahomes and other great quarterbacks. So I expect them to be a lot better. It hurts them not having a first round pick, obviously, with the tampering with Tom Brady. But I believe that defense is going to be much improved. And if Tua is healthy, they have a chance at winning that division because they only lost by a few points against Buffalo in the wild card game. If Tua's healthy and they added Jalen Ramsey, they've added David Long, expect that defense to be better, expect that offense to be rolling. That's going to be a dangerous team. And maybe they get someone like a Jamar Gibbs in the second round, help them out at running back. That could be a very dangerous team next year. So I'm liking the Dolphins as my first winner of free agency.
I will say, in regards to that selection too, there have been rumors about the Dolphins being linked to Dalvin Cook if he's being moved as well. So they're really looking for that big splash on the run game. They re-signed both their backs, Jeff Wilson and Raheem Mostert, this year. But I feel like those guys, not sure if that's enough for the run game. They did pretty well as a duo, but having Dalvin Cook brings a whole new dimension as well, which could really benefit them.
Yeah, my concern with that pick is the offensive line not being addressed and the injuries with Tua. But otherwise, yeah, I definitely agree that they did a lot on the defensive side of the ball to kind of combat, everything going on in that division.
Yeah. Eli, what about you? What's another winner that you had?
A winner that I mentioned right before I talked about my Lions pick. I really like what the Eagles did. It wasn't anything flashy. They re-signed Fletcher Cox, James Bradbury, Brandon Graham. But one of my favorite signings of this offseason was the Rashad Penny signing for only $1.35 million. Obviously, his injuries are concerned, but with that small of a contract and the likes of Boston Scott and Kenneth Gainwell still in the mix, I think taking a risk on Rashad Penny for $1.3 million. We saw in his last healthy game, which I believe was Detroit, he ran for around 150 yards, and he looked really dynamic. So if you can get that back, I think that'll be a knock out of the park signing there, especially behind that Eagles offensive line that does an amazing job protecting Jalen Hurts and led Miles Sanders to over 1,000 yards last year. And then sneaky signings like Greedy Williams, who had high potential on Cleveland, never lived up to it, and Terrell Edmonds. I think those are two signings that, once again, losing Chauncey Gardner-Johnson and TJ Edwards as well. I think those signings could, if they pan out as well. So they took a couple of risks, but they kind of had to, since they can't be too aggressive with the future extensions on the table.
Yeah, I liked what the Eagles did. I think they're going to continue to be a powerhouse, not only in their division, but in the NFC in general. Steve, what about you? What's another winner you had?
It pains me to say this because I'm not a big fan of this team, but at the Dallas Cowboys, I think kind of making Tony Pollard the center of their backfield, leaving the door open to draft someone to go along with him, kind of putting that franchise tag on Tony Pollard. Finally letting Zeke go with that, kind of albatross contract they had going there. And then just also, just signing Donovan Wilson back, getting Stephon Gilmore, to go with Trayvon Diggs on defense, Leighton Vander Esch, also bringing in Brandon Cooks at wide receiver. And then also just leaving that open to kind of taking best player available at that 26th pick. I think they're stacked again. They have all sorts of weapons on defense, and I think they can improve that offense even more. They did bring kind of before the free agency, they got Tyron Smith back in the fold as well. So I just, they don't ever seem to be able to put it together when it counts. Some of that might be coaching, quarterback play, but I feel like they have the right pieces in place to make it happen.
Yeah, I like the Gilmore addition for their defense. I think that will go a long way. It's going to be a tough division for sure to have to compete in the NFC East.
Especially with the Commanders improving and hopefully Sam Howell being the guy, which I'm not too confident on that. And then the Giants making signings. And like you mentioned, the franchise tag, I was pretty big on that, bringing Bijan Robinson in. I love that pick for the Cowboys. Jonathan, what would be your last winner of this offseason?
My last winner is going to be, I'm going to go with the Denver Broncos. So it's torn a little bit between the Saints and the Broncos here, but I will go with the Broncos. I think that they improved the trenches, which is something that needed to happen. They got Mike McGlinchey from San Francisco. They got Ben Powers from the Ravens. Ben Powers is very solid interior offensive lineman. They also got Zach Allen for the defensive line from Arizona. I think that that's going to go a long way to protecting Russell Wilson. I think Russell Wilson will have a much better year this year than he had last year. They added depth at running back. We saw how thin they kind of were last year once they lost Javonte Williams. Sorry, I blinked a little bit. So they got Samaje Perine to help. I think that's going to help them a lot. And probably the biggest addition of the offseason for them is they got a Hall of Fame head coach in Sean Payton. They have a Super Bowl winning head coach, Sean Payton. Nathaniel Hackett did not hack it, couldn't cut it. Was horrible as a head coach, but I think that they're going to be much better coached this year. I'm going to love seeing Sean Payton go toe-to-toe with Andy Reid 2 times a year. I think that's going to be great for football, great for the division. We talk about how this is arguably the toughest division in football, and how no one's really going to beat the Chiefs. The thing is like, I think that they have 3 other teams in that division that are tough, that are going to give you a battle each week. As long as this offensive line help improves Russell Wilson's play, they're going to be competitive next year, I believe.
Yeah, I like that pick. I think the Denver Broncos, like you mentioned, that biggest thing was getting an actual head coach. We learned that Nathaniel Hackett is nothing more than a coordinator at best. And even after that performance, he might not even get a coordinator job back. And like you mentioned, building the trenches, the offensive line and defensive line, that was stellar of the Broncos to address their needs.
Yeah, never sleep on a team that's building its trenches, because honestly, outside of quarterback, that's the most important part of an NFL roster, is having a line to protect your quarterback and having a line that can go get the other person's quarterback. But yeah, Eli, what about you? What's your final winner?
My final winner of the offseason, I'd have to go with the Kansas City Chiefs. Unfortunately, I feel like they can never not have a good offseason with how friendly Patrick Mahomes' contract is. I think what they did with that Patrick Mahomes contract itself frees them up so much every single offseason that they can just push it back so much. You're seeing like the Browns have to mess with Deshaun Watson's contract a ton and how much guarantees they gave him. Deshaun Watson, if I remember this correctly, Deshaun Watson's almost making as many guarantees in 5 years as Patrick Mahomes is making in 10 years, which I think is crazy because Patrick Mahomes is easily the best quarterback in the NFL, as with his what he's shown is his years in the starters make to the conference championship game every year as a starter. And I think signing Jawan Taylor, they lost Orlando Brown, got another stud offensive tackle right back, and then getting an edge rusher and Charles Omenihu to address the Frank Clark, because Frank Clark couldn't really he was a big playoff producer, not much of a regular season producer. So they get Charles Omenihu from the Patriots, and then Drew Tranquil, who was a tackling machine for the Chargers last year. I think overall, not a ton of signings, but when you're as good as the Chiefs, you don't need to make a ton of signings. You don't want to waste money when you have so many young pieces because of that Mahomes contract. It all goes back to there.
Yeah, that's a good one. Steve, did you have any other winners that you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, I'll throw one more in there. And then, just to add to Eli's, I really like the Richie James signing right at the end of the free agency too. So just to kind of fill in the receivers for KC. But yeah, totally agree. They did well in the draft last year, and they just continued on. And when you have Mahomes, it makes it look really easy. My last winner is the Seattle Seahawks. So yeah, as far as the Seahawks, they got Draymond Jones on a big contract. They also brought Bobby Wagner back into the fold. Got Julian Love, the safety from the Giants. Also got Geno Smith on a team-friendly contract. On top of that, they go into the draft having 4 picks in the top 52. So they're set up really well. If they draft as well as they did last year, which is a big ask. I mean, they got Kenneth Walker, Tariq Woolen, just to mention a couple players. But, if they're able to do something similar in this year's draft, even hit on 2 of those top 4 or 5 picks, similar to what we talked about with Detroit, they could get in that top 3 conversation in the NFC for, playoffs, NFC championship, those sorts of things. So they're definitely building something really good there. And obviously dumping Russell Wilson is kind of paying dividends as far as draft picks and the way they were able to kind of reshuffle that roster.
Yeah, I think Seattle, especially with their draft picks, are going to be a really interesting team to watch this coming year. Yeah. So with that, let's transition to our losers. So I'll go first. My first loser of the offseason is the Jacksonville Jaguars. They were 25th in sacks last year, 28th in pass yards allowed, and 29th in third down percentage as a defense. It's not going to cut it going forward in a division that should be more competitive next year with 2 to 3 new quarterbacks going to be in that division. So I'm kind of surprised that they didn't try to do more on defense. I know that in recent years they've been pretty aggressive in free agency. I think they picked the wrong year to not be aggressive. I was looking at the cap earlier. I believe that they have like 14 million or something like that in cap space. So they have space to make moves happen, and they just didn't. And they're sitting there with a mid-20s pick. They might not win the division next year because of how this division is going to shape up, with the Colts potentially going QB. Texans, I would be shocked if they don't go QB at some point, and then who knows what the Titans do. So Jacksonville Jaguars, they only signed basically no one of note. They just re-signed their own guys, which is great. Like, you got to re-sign your own guys, but still the defense was not cutting it in those areas, and I think that they need to do more if they want to be competitive going forward with Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, I can see that pick. At the same time, with the hoping that Trayvon Walker develops, I'm sure they're heavily betting on that. Obviously, it was their first overall pick. And I think edge rushers are relatively deep in this draft. I think that is arguably the deepest position in this draft. As it kind of was last year, like edge and cornerback have been like the deepest pool of players in the draft. But I definitely see where you're coming from. If you have the money and you have a giant need like that, I can see where you're coming from with that selection. Steve, who do you think is a loser? And also, what do you think on that Jacksonville pick?
Yeah, as far as the Jacksonville, I agree with Jonathan. Jacksonville was very fortunate last year. They did take a big dip into free agency with wide receivers, and just kind of filled their roster and signed some really big contracts. Paid off, and they got a playoff win. And but again, they're really fortunate with their schedule and kind of the way the division fell. So I agree that while all these other teams are improving, they just kind of stood pat and kind of kept status quo. So as far as my loser, I have the Arizona Cardinals. They, obviously J.J. Watt retired. Calais Campbell really didn't see a future or want to retire there or even stay there beyond football. And you had Zach Allen go to the Broncos, which was mentioned earlier. They just, with over $23 million in cap space, they just really didn't bring anybody in. Their only signing of note was Zach Pascal at wide receiver, which is obviously very underwhelming. And that's before the inevitable of DeAndre Hopkins kind of going out the door wherever he ends up. So doesn't seem like, even with a new coach and, possibly starting anew there, that that franchise is really heading in the right direction. So kind of like where the Rams are going, I think the Arizona's, kind of going to be one of the worst teams in the NFC, and really did nothing to improve that.
Yeah, I think they're going to have a problem going forward with the Kyler Murray contract as well. Because, I mean, if Kyler Murray ends up developing and can be a franchise guy, then great. I think that was a little premature to give him a contract like that for a team that wasn't really that proven. Yeah, Eli, what about you? Who's a loser in your mind?
My easy loser would be the New England Patriots. I think the signing of Juju over re-signing Jacoby Myers for the same exact contract was a big loss for them. I feel like Jacoby Myers, not only younger, but I think he's a better wide receiver. And then really they didn't make a ton of signings of note. They signed Mike Gesicki, which I'm not really sure how I feel about the Mike Gesicki signing when they already have Hunter Henry. They signed those tight ends to giant contracts and never really panned out. And as Bill Belichick, his comment that really bugged me, saying, the Patriots, why do you think they'll succeed this year? Look at the past 25 years. It's not really how the NFL works. You got to look at the future. Obviously, the Patriots, one of the more successful franchises of the past 20 years, but their relationship continually worsening with Mac Jones. They signed a defensive coordinator to operate their offense last year. I think the Patriots are going downhill, and Bill Belichick is just I think he's running out of gas. I think he should consider retirement here pretty soon.
Ooh, hot take, Bill Belichick retirement. I actually don't disagree with you. Something that Bill Belichick reminds me a lot of Steelers Hall of Fame coach Chuck Noll, where Chuck Noll, huge dynasty in the 70s, right? Wins 4 Super Bowls. Obviously, Bill had a longer dynasty. I'm not going to dispute that, but just hung on too long. Like, his ways kind of got outdated for the NFL. The NFL changed and adapted, and he wasn't really able to build much of a winner outside of that. And I think you see that with Bill, where he's trying to. It almost felt like they're trying to replicate Brady a little bit with Mac Jones in the pick. Mac Jones, assuming Aaron Rodgers goes to the Jets, in my opinion, Mac Jones is the 4th best quarterback in that division. Like, you're not winning the division with the 4th best quarterback in today's NFL. You're barely going to probably compete for a wild card, if that. Like, they're going to have a rough go of it for a little bit. Interested to see what they do in this draft if they decide to go quarterback. I know that's been a rumor, or if who knows what the future holds for them. But yeah, I agree with you. They need to move on. My next loser, real quickly, is, and I'm torn between two teams. I'm gonna go with the Ravens. So this is gonna be a controversial pick. I'm all for controversy. Obviously, you guys know I'm a Steelers fan, so I'm a little bit biased here. Most of their signings have been like 1-year deals, which is fine, but it's not really building for anything. They got Odell Beckham, which is great. I think that's going to help their wide receiver core. But the biggest issue, and the reason why, to me, they're the losers, is they have a big question mark at quarterback. They have a quarterback in Lamar Jackson who doesn't want to be there, already issued a goodbye to Ravens fans. Like, he's out. If he comes back after that, it's going to be messy. To me, it's messy for the locker room. It's a distraction more often than that. That guy doesn't want to be there. He wants to go where he can get paid, which is fine. But I think they have a big issue there at quarterback, and you haven't really seen them make any moves to try to adjust that. Obviously, they're still banking on Lamar coming back, but Lamar wants out, and they have no trade partner for Lamar. That's been a big thing, is that a lot of teams have come out and said that they're not interested in Lamar Jackson. So right now there's just a huge question mark there, and I think that that's one of the worst places to be as a franchise when you have a question mark at quarterback, especially in the AFC North. I could see them being at the bottom of the division this year, whether Lamar comes back on a 1-year deal on the franchise tag or whatever, or if they're going with Tyler Huntley or someone else.
Yeah, I agree with you completely there, Jonathan. It kind of, you have Lamar, he kind of played the game, and, now you almost have to draft a quarterback at some point. Mm-hmm. On top of that, you lost Jason Pierre-Paul, Justin Houston, Chuck Clark. You have several defenders that are either not re-signed or have already left. And, and all you have to show for it is OBJ, and who knows what guarantee you have there. So completely agree. One last one I have is this might be controversial as well, and I may be a little biased, but I didn't really, at least for this offseason, didn't really understand what the Chicago Bears did. So the way the NFL is going, and we'll talk about it in the draft, is teams are kind of building in the trenches like we've talked about. So the Bears, other than grabbing Nate Davis, really didn't address that. They already had an all-pro linebacker in Roquan Smith. They let him go, and they turn around and give Tremaine Edmonds a similar contract, who I think we can all agree isn't as good as Roquan Smith, sorry. So just, it didn't make sense. They signed TJ Edwards. So I guess the money for those two was probably a lot more than they would have had to pay Roquan Smith. And then bringing in DJ Moore, Dante Foreman, I think it kind of looks nice, but I don't think it all fits with their offense. So having the first round pick in 24 and the second round pick in 25 is nice. But if you look at a lot of talk out there, Bears fans are kind of pounding their chest like they're going to possibly contend for the division this year, and I just don't see it.
No, they're the third best team in that division at best, I think, even after all the moves they made. I think that they should have tried to trade Justin Fields, start fresh at quarterback with the number one overall pick. You have, obviously, the new head coach, GM. Like, they didn't draft Fields. Just start fresh. Reset your clock a little bit, because the Bears just have too many glaring holes where I don't think that's going to get really filled with this year's draft. Hope maybe next year's, but at that point you're getting closer to the time where you're going to have to pay your quarterback.
Oh yeah, exactly. They only have one pick in the top 53, so that's kind of what I mean about this offseason. So
yeah,
really you have to draft an offensive lineman, and what else do you do? So yeah,
and there's rumors that they're trying to trade out of that pick. So yeah, it's not going to be a good look. But Eli, what about you?
Well, we're seeing a common theme here, 2 in a row. Picking the Green Bay Packers. I think overall, the Vikings, Packers, and Bears all had 3 awful off seasons. The Vikings, probably the second best, but still I didn't love what they did. But the Green Bay Packers, I think, had a worse off season than the Bears, simply because their biggest signing was re-signing Keyshawn Nixon, who is a returner. He's not even a play. Like, obviously returns are important, but to a certain extent, of course. And letting Alan Lazard walk, which I don't know if they necessarily had a choice on that because of Aaron Rodgers also. 100% out the door at this point. It's either he's playing for the Jets or nobody, from what we've seen. And then also Robert Tonyan leaving. So you're stuck with Romeo Doubs and Christian Watson, which aren't awful, but they're super young. So obviously still have Aaron Jones at running back. So obviously you still have some weapons, but you're running into the same issue with what you ran into at the end of Aaron Rodgers' tenure. Not enough weapons, in my opinion. And I don't think the defense, they started to come on at the end of this past year when they went on their little winning streak. But in the end, I don't think they'll be able to replicate that much. And I think they'll probably be on the bottom of the NFC North, at best third. I think the Bears and Packers are very interchangeable. and I don't know what direction either team is going.
Yeah, it's probably the big question mark of what do you have in Jordan Love? I think will determine that. But yeah, I agree with you. They're no bet. They're at least like they're third at best, or which we'll talk about. Like the Aaron Rodgers saga. We'll talk about the Lamar Jackson saga coming up. So we'll take a quick break and we'll be right back.
Welcome back, everybody, to this free agency episode of Speak Now. We are getting into the sagas now, the two big QB sagas of the offseason. And we'll be starting with Lamar Jackson, which is a polarizing one. The Ravens just recently signed Odell Beckham to a pretty lucrative deal, especially from what we see in the wide receiver market, which has been relatively down this offseason. Signing OBJ to a big contract, big commitment. And not even he knows if Lamar is staying. So this is a big saga, been going on for a while now. And the two sides never got a deal. Lamar Jackson, his own agent, another big thing in this big saga. And so we'll start with Steve. What do you think, like, when looking at this Lamar Jackson deal, why do you think a deal hasn't been done? And do you think a deal should get done between the two teams, or what do you think should be next?
Yeah, I think so far kind of some mistakes have been made on both sides. I guess starting with Lamar, obviously, I think we'd agree that he's overvalued himself, kind of taken the Deshaun Watson, Kyler Murray, those contracts that I think most franchises would agree are mistakes. And he's kind of trying to put himself in the same breath as, Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, even Justin Herbert, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, those quarterbacks that are probably going to get those big contracts coming up. And, one of the main things on top of performance is availability, and Lamar's missed, I believe 5 or 6 games each of the last 2 years. And on top of that, no one knows if he was really injured at the end of last year. And they kind of left Tyler Huntley out there for them to finish the season. So, so a lot of mistakes there. And, Lamar bet on himself, and so far it hasn't panned out. He even turned down, I believe it was a 3-year, $132 million contract offer from the Ravens. So, so they put I believe it was a non-exclusive tag on him, $32 million. If someone signs them, they can match or offer. They'd have to give up 2 first-round picks if they decide not to match that. So as far as the Ravens, I think it was kind of shrewd to do that. But, what's the next step for the Ravens? So that's where I have a problem with the Ravens is on top of, losing some free agents and what you mentioned as far as just bringing in OBJ. They do have some dynamic players on offense. OBJ is still a dynamic receiver. 2 knee injuries. I do have some question marks there, but he can still do a lot on the field, as he showcased with the Rams Super Bowl run. You also have J.K. Dobbins and Mark Andrews. So, I think it makes the most sense to answer the last part of your question for the Ravens to bring Lamar Jackson back. I think they have no other decision to make, but how does that work, and how is everybody going to be happy in the situation? So yeah, those are kind of my thoughts.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think they're in a position right now where it's like I said earlier, it's going to be really awkward if he comes back, whether it's on the franchise tag or whatnot. And it's like the thing about the exclusive tag is no team is going to try to sign him and lose 2 first-round picks. They'd much rather like negotiate something else out. But I think for me, the question becomes, which team becomes a legit contender by adding Lamar Jackson? I think it's easy to look at Lamar and be like, oh, well, he's a former MVP. Like, who wouldn't want to have him, right? He is the best, the rushing, like, dual threat quarterback in that sense of all time, But I think what we miss is it's not the guys that are able to run first then pass that are the most successful. It's the guys that are great throwers of the football but can also run and have mobility. Look at Josh Allen, look at Patrick Mahomes. each guy is super mobile. Even Aaron Rodgers back in the day was able to be mobile, but they're not like they're not running quarterbacks in a sense, but they're able to be in the pocket. They're able to extend plays out. Ben Roethlisberger recently on his podcast came out, was like, you don't fear Lamar sitting there in the pocket picking you apart. You fear him when he gets outside the pocket, he makes things happen. So yeah, what team becomes like a contender by adding Lamar Jackson, especially with the contract that he's gonna command? Yeah, I think something that the national sports media has gotten wrong is they're comparing Lamar to Deshaun Watson, to Kyler Murray, and saying, well, he's better than them, he deserves this contract. And I think what they're missing is the Browns are a franchise that makes a bunch of stupid decisions. And they've continued to do that with the Deshaun Watson. No team wants to repeat that for a quarterback. And Kyler Murray, again, you paid a guy that wasn't fully proven. And as you said, Steve, I'm full agreement. I think that they're regretting it because it really handicaps how you can build your roster. So I have 3 teams that I think would become contenders in a sense by adding Lamar Jackson. The top 2 are the Colts, just for salary cap reasons. They have about $22-ish million in cap, I believe, so that they can make something happen. And as we talked about earlier, I think that division kind of becomes a little bit more wide open with the Jaguars kind of standing pat. But the Colts pick 4th overall. Why would you go and try to get Lamar Jackson now when you can get a guy on a rookie deal and you can continue to build your roster? The other team is the Falcons. That division is wide open. It's going to be interesting to see who the Panthers pick, whether it's going to be Stroud or Young, or could be Richardson, who knows. So maybe that makes them a little bit more competitive. Right now, the top team looks to be maybe the Saints with Derek Carr, but that division is just wide open. So if the Falcons really want to make this happen, they have about 10 million, so they don't have as much as the Colts. Could they financially make it happen? Maybe. And then I think that the Commanders, they're just a team with great defense. They need a quarterback, but they're not going to make it happen. They have about $2 million in cap space. And yeah, as I believe they were one of the ones that basically has been very open about not being in the Lamar Jackson sweepstakes. And I think something that we miss about Lamar is that he's 14-14 in his career versus winning teams, which is fine. But then let's take out his MVP season, which I would almost argue is kind of an outlier based on how the rest of his career so far has gone. Not to say that he doesn't have the potential to put up more numbers like that, but Steve, as you said, like he's missed about 5 games each of the last 2 years. Like he's not been available. He's been injured. He's been hurt, and he's 8-3 or 8-13. So, excuse me, versus winning teams besides his MVP season, and he's 4-8 versus winning teams in the last 2 seasons. So, who wants a quarterback that isn't going to give you a good chance to compete? One, because he's not available, and yeah, I know that people will argue the supporting cast for Baltimore, but I mean, Baltimore's never been one to have a strong supporting cast in terms of like wide receivers and such. Like, look at what they were able to do with Joe Flacco back in the day. So, you know, I think that whatever team gets Lamar Jackson is obviously getting a talented quarterback. They just better have a roster in place for him to come in and compete. And it's got to be a similar situation to the Rams bringing in Matthew Stafford, because in about a year or two, that roster will implode based on his contract.
Well, you obviously mentioned the Falcons. Personally, obviously, you mentioned all the issues with Lamar Jackson and all you'd have to give up with the salary cap and what he's asking for. I really don't see why the Falcons don't do this. They're not really in a position to draft a quarterback. Their draft position by then, with how mock drafts and reports have gone, it seems like the top 4 quarterbacks will be all but gone. And from what Desmond Ridder showed, not a great passer, really. He had a decent connection with Drake London. And obviously Kyle Pitts was injured at the end of the year. But I think Lamar Jackson on that run heavy Falcons team, I think that can make the Falcons a dangerous team. Obviously, they have to give up that first this year, which they would potentially be able to use on someone like Quentin Johnson to bolster that wide receiver core. But I just don't see the Ravens keeping him. So I just don't understand why the Ravens would keep him either. I think Odell itself doesn't seem like it'll heal all the wounds necessary between the two sides, especially since Lamar once again representing himself. So he's talking directly with the Ravens. So I think Atlanta is where he'll play. Which is a bold statement at this point since they have continually, Arthur Blank, the owners, continually said they're not interested. They're riding with Desmond Ridder, which is tough. But at the same time, you don't hear reports on these big deals till they happen a lot of the time. So I'm not going to rule anyone out. Like, we didn't hear about A.J. Brown getting traded really until the draft. Like, we didn't hear anything about that. So I wouldn't completely rule it out. Obviously, more of a bold take saying he's going to play for the Falcons, but like we've mentioned, I don't see him playing for the Ravens either, so it's kind of a mystery.
Yeah, I think you got to wait. If I'm any other team, I'm waiting until draft day or after the draft because, to your credit, like to your point, I think the Falcons might be outside of the Ravens the best fit for him, not counting like salary cap wise. But why rush the trade? Like there's no reason to get a trade done now. Like Baltimore is the one that's in a crappy position. Like they have no leverage in this really. And both Baltimore and Lamar are kind of just both in crappy positions. Like just wait it out, see who's available to you at your pick at 8, and if there's not a guy there, try to flip it. Then I don't know. But that's my opinion with as we get into Aaron Rodgers too. Like for both the Jets and any other team that's considering Lamar Jackson, wait till after the draft because like those teams are kind of handicapped. They're not bringing back those quarterbacks.
Yeah, that's a tough situation. Steve, you have any other comments on the Lamar Jackson situation that's been ongoing?
Yeah, the only other team I could see, and I agree, nothing's probably going to happen until after the draft, is the Tennessee Titans could actually be really interesting. Just with Derrick Henry and kind of the way their roster is shaped. But ultimately, I do see him staying with the Ravens, to be honest, kind of like I mentioned. I just, I've seen some stuff out there with him and OBJ and that sort of thing. And, even if it's just for 1 year, I think he's just going to bet on himself. And it might be a toxic situation ultimately, but I think he's going to end up on the Ravens this year.
Yeah, I definitely think it's most likely outcome at this point simply because has that 1 year tag and has Odell Beckham, so he may just be an approve it type year. But going into our other quarterback, I think Aaron Rodgers, arguably a bigger story just because of how obscure this one has been. From Aaron Rodgers going on a dark retreat for 4 days, going on Pat McAfee saying, oh, the deal is going to be done soon, saying he was going to retire before. And just recently, we've had Jets GM Joe Douglas confirming it's going to happen. To then multiple reports that the sides have not talked for multiple weeks regarding the trade, that they've been far apart. I just think this is another crappy situation. I do think it's more crappy for the Jets. I feel like the Packers have a backup option. The Jets don't really. They lost Mike White. And my thought process was why wait for a guy you're not even guaranteeing to play and play at a high level in that matter either. And why not go for somebody like another QB that's potentially on the market as a bridge quarterback where you're putting all your chips on a quarterback who has been the past couple of years, I'd argue, the diva in the quarterback section of the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, I also agree with a lot of those takes. Aaron Rodgers kind of put some guarantees out there every year that he's not going to string teams along, and just kind of the same thing happens over and over again. This is kind of back in my day, but it reminds me a lot of what Brett Favre used to do every offseason. So it's just crazy that after all these years, kind of going through all the same kind of things with Aaron Rodgers, just with how much salary he's costing Green Bay, the demands that he's making to go to the Jets. And, one of the last reports is there just hasn't been any negotiations, and, the Packers are asking for I believe, a first and second round pick, and just just a lot of craziness. One thing that also could potentially happen is DeAndre Hopkins potentially going to the Jets. Heard some reports on that. Maybe the draft, or that's kind of the last shoe to drop. For Aaron Rodgers to go over there, or he just decides I'm going to retire, and then you're back with Zach Wilson. And I think a lot of us would kind of laugh at that whole situation, especially with how talented that Jets roster is, and they just wouldn't be able to get over the top without having that quarterback in place. What are your thoughts, Jonathan?
Honestly, I think the Jets are fine either way, and here's why. One thing that, and I know players will deny this, but one thing that the Aaron Rodgers hype has brought to the Jets is some free agent additions. So they've started building their roster. They're, like you said, they're not in position to draft a quarterback this year. There's always next year. There's the kid coming out from North Carolina, and there's Caleb Williams from USC. If you suck this year, you get a chance at one of those guys. I do think Aaron Rodgers ends up on the Jets. Jets are retired. He's not going back to the Packers. Packers have long moved off him. For the Jets, I think, again, wait till after the draft. There's no reason to rush this. Like, see who you have available for you. You got to build that line. You could be able to get Paris Johnson. You could be able to get Broderick Jones. There's options for them at, I believe, 11. But if they were to add Aaron Rodgers, I think it depends on which Aaron Rodgers you're getting. If you're getting the pre-2020 or pre-2022 Rodgers, you should win that division, or no worse than second place in a wild card team. And the reason I say that is because looking at the Jets, they played phenomenally on defense last year. They only gave up 30 points, I believe, once, which was to the Browns. If Aaron Rodgers is in MVP form again, they should be a huge contender. Do not count out the Jets. If it's 2022 Rodgers, which I think us two are more inclined to believe, because this league is what have you done for me lately, I would look at them as probably a third place team, assuming that Tua stays healthy, and a fringe wild card team, because they were competitive this last year with Zach Wilson, with Joe Flacco, with Mike White. So Rodgers would definitely be an upgrade. But you got to be winning now with Rodgers. You got to be winning in the next 1 to 2 years if you do get him. Honestly, I think it's best for all sides if he were to just retire. It lets the Packers roll with Jordan Love. The Jets are kind of screwed this year, but they should be drafting high enough next year to hopefully go get a guy. And then Rodgers gets to keep his legacy of being a lifelong Packer, which he's talked a lot about in the past. But to your point, Steve, I think it's kind of interesting how Rodgers has basically went the full Brett Favre cycle, where he was drafted to be his replacement, got Jordan Love drafted to be Rodgers' replacement. Now, aging quarterback about to go to the Jets. Who knows? Maybe in a couple of years we'll see him on the Vikings.
Well, another thing, like you said, we get the 2022 Rodgers. Why give up a first or second? In the end, you're going to think, why did I give up a first or second for this guy? When you could maybe have traded for somebody like a wild card like Trey Lance or Ryan Tannehill, kind of like a bridge option. Or in Trey Lance, it's more of a bet that he's going to pan out as a younger guy. But more of a less risk situation rather than giving up that high of a pick for an unpredictable guy, arguably the most unpredictable guy in the NFL in the past year. Why not go for more of a bridge guy? Rodgers himself is kind of a bridge, but they're kind of treating him more like, I'd argue more like he's like a bridge franchise guy. It's kind of a weird situation where he is basically a bridge quarterback. He will not play there for more than 2 years. In my eyes, I don't think he has more than 2 years left in him after this year. So why not, as a Jets, as a franchise moving forward, why go in that older veteran area when you could go for more of an actual bridge guy until you can get a a viable long-term replacement.
It's kind of like a better version of what the Titans did with Tannehill a little bit. Maybe not better, but because Tannehill thrived. But it's like, I mean, we all knew that Tannehill wasn't going to be a long-term answer at quarterback, right? But yeah, I agree with you, Eli. Like, Rodgers is a guy by name is a franchise guy, but at this point in his career, he's a bridge guy because he's not going to be here for the next 5 to 10 years. And you got to win. Like I said, you got to win now with him. You're not really in position right now to draft a first-round quarterback. However, they have several second-round picks. Like, they have actually a decent amount of picks. They could trade up to go get someone, or take someone like a Tanner McKee or Hendon Hooker in the second round and see what they can do. And then it's not that big a financial investment.
Yeah, I think people are chasing that blueprint of, I go out and get Tom Brady. I line up offensive linemen in the draft, and I go out and win a Super Bowl. I get Matt Stafford. I bring in a bunch of, future Hall of Famers, that sort of thing. And I think New York has taken that same swing. Why am I going to go out and get Ryan Tannehill? Why don't I just swing for the fences? Hope Aaron Rodgers kind of has a rebirth of, like you said, even, 3 or 4 years ago, he was back-to-back MVP. So, it's not like it was 10 years ago. So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I don't think it's a bad move, because it's shown recent success in, again, Tom Brady and Matt Stafford.
Here's the only issue I have with, I agree with you in that comparison. The only issue I have in this scenario with that is the AFC East is arguably, like, is going to be the hardest division of the three that you just mentioned to win. Like, Brady had Drew Brees in the Saints, but outside of that, there wasn't much in the South to really compete with. Like, Brady kind of had a little bit of a cakewalk, a little bit. I think you could argue, and then Stafford. Yeah, the Rams were built to win. That division was a little bit more competitive, but still, Rodgers versus Josh Allen twice a year, and then if Tua is healthy, twice a year. I don't know. To me, it's not that guaranteed of a success. But yeah, to your point, Steve, I can see why a team would go do that, because it has resulted in multiple Super Bowls now.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like we've mentioned, I think this move is destined to happen. All signs point to it happening. Especially, I feel like the Jets at this point are so committed that, and in the end, they might be so desperate. They've already said Zach Wilson's the number 2 quarterback. They already said he won't be starting. So they already have that place for Rodgers. They probably already have his locker set in place. They just don't know the date he's coming. I think they have way too much committed to this point where they may have to give up the first. Like, it'll get to the point where negotiations will get nowhere, and they're stuck with only Zach Wilson in the QB room, to the point where they're going to be forced to give up a first for Rodgers, which, in my opinion, is nowhere near his worth anymore at this point. And for a 39-year-old quarterback, not really great value for the Jets. Anybody have any last opinions here on the Aaron Rodgers saga? Probably the most polarizing thing of this whole offseason.
I'll just end with, as critical as I am of potentially making them, I do think Rodgers could be very competitive in that division. I wouldn't be surprised if Aaron Rodgers comes out and balls out for the Jets based on the talent that would be around.
Yeah, he could very well ball out. I mean, like Steve mentioned, not only obviously he had the poor 2022 year. We know that obviously isn't Rodgers we're used to seeing, but he was back-to-back MVPs the 2 years prior. So could he still have it in him? Potentially, but we're not so sure. And with that question wrapping up, that'll wrap up this portion of the free agency Speak Now episodes. We'll be doing a mock draft in a separate episode there, where we're going to be alternating picks between the 3 of us, and then giving opinions on all 31 picks, not 32 this year because the Dolphins scandal. And we will go through all those picks, probably get a little banter in there as well. knowing the three of us. And hopefully overall, we got a pretty close to accurate draft. There'll be no trades, I'd like to mention as well. So we're just going to do it based off what we believe the team needs. And obviously, there's always surprising trades and picks. But that will be the next episode. So thank you for tuning in to Speak Now. And have a good day, guys.
I don't know what you told, I'm gonna make you fall. Yeah, break the mold. How can you not be so? Yeah, putting the hours in, pushing the pen to the pad, putting that 10 to the 10, blowing out the 616. This is it. Yeah, did it again.